Uh-oh. That's right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
See, Christy and Bob are on here somewhere, or about to be.
Yeah,
This is going to be all new to me, so we're going to try to suffer through it together.
yeah, we don't have the video on. What's wrong with this?
I'm gonna turn mine off because here, let's see.
Yeah, I got my volume too loud or something.
Yeah, mine was now.
You have to hear.
Trying to get my volume down here.
I'm gonna get out of mine because
See, our computer's too close.
I'm getting mine. Yeah.
We tried.
Now ask him if he can see us.
We tried to get it on the TV.
We have two computers, so it was.
The TV wouldn't work.
I can't see you. I can see you.
That's good.
That's okay.
We don't want you to see.
We're not doing the visual. We're just doing the audio. We can see you.
Okay, now go to that square at the upper right. Yes. You might want to go on just to let him know who you are. Or go on video.
Oh, he already knows who I am. We already communicated.
Undo.
Here, unplug it so you can hear it. They can't see me, can they?
No, not yet, but I want him to see you.
Okay.
So go down here and see how it's got a red line. Hit the video.
I like looking at the teacher when I'm in a class.
Oh, there's Tim.
Yeah.
Okay, see, I heard that. That's him. Okay, so I can stop video.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I heard him. Now, nothing else.
Now you should go hear them talking. You?
People are. Where's the volume?
That's what I said. Damn it, Tim, I said, is it okay? So you gotta shrink this.
Yeah, how come?
Mine is. Yeah.
I know. Well, if you can try it, I never used it.
Because the computer.
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
There you go.
Yeah, he
Why
can't.
don't you switch it with him? Put your camera
Oh,
on.
now
Switch it with him.
Well, there's other people on. You can't hear me.
Yeah, you can probably.
Rick, can you see me?
I hear you, every word.
I didn't.
How to-
Oh, you can? Okay. Oh.
Yeah, here we Okay. Well, as you can tell, I have no idea what I'm doing, which may be a good thing. I'm not sure. I have muted Allison and Bob at this point. I don't know how to get you back in other than unmute you, but if you could okay, I guess you've muted yourselves. What do I know, right? In any case, we're trying for the first time to use this system to do our Ecclesiastes.
You should put the camera on right now so you can see me.
Oh, okay. Down on the bottom.
Yes, the bottom left.
Okay.
See the camera on.
All right. I see we have Tim, Bob, and Kent above, so thank you for joining the class. I'm getting messages of some things unstable as far as video, but that's to be expected, I guess. I'm not sure where we're at with that. So yep, so right now everybody's unmuted but me, I hope. Although I don't know where to go to. There we go. Okay, so the host is spotlighted panel. I figured that out. That would be you. We got Freon with me, it looks like. And some of you have decided to take your video down and mute yourself, so that's fine. I'm actually going to try to use PowerPoint maybe, so that you don't watching me much. You're actually going to be watching PowerPoint. And we're going to start this in Ecclesiastes 1:16. So if you're not nearby, you have a chance. Problem I have is trying to figure out how to get back to my screen. All right. We'll go with the PowerPoint and see if it works.
You want me to talk? Rick, can you hear me?
Tell me what you see on my screen.
Rick, it's Kitzel.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
No, you're breaking up. You're stuttering.
Okay, that's not good. All right, well, I'm trying to figure out how to make these PowerPoint work, and so far I'm not having it yet.
You don't want to go back to the old one, do you?
I'm not,
You mean the Facebook?
yeah.
No, I got it on.
Okay.
We may not, we're just trying to get stuff working. Rick, can you hear me?
Yeah, I
Can you hear me?
can hear me all right? No, you can hear me all right?
It's not syncing right. Your lips aren't matching the audio.
So,
I think this is more trouble.
Sarah,
Good morning. Good morning.
morning. Okay, here's what I'm being told so far, is that I'm breaking up. Is that true?
I don't know what else to do.
Sarah,
Should I try it on his computer in the office?
Alyssa is going to go down and try to help my parents get on.
okay, let me ask you a couple questions. Can you hear me all right?
I'm not hearing you. Let me see if I turn
Can
my
you hear
volume
me?
up.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's a little better.
I think I'm doing a commercial. All right, here's my problem. When I bring
You should understand me.
it covers the entire screen, and it's not any ideas what I'm doing wrong.
Okay, mute everyone else
Okay.
so that I can hear, because I have background noise and I can't hear you.
Okay, everyone's muted but you and me, it looks like.
All right. Okay, now tell me again, when you try to,
And when I go to my PowerPoint and I pull it up, it covers the entire,
uh-huh.
so I can't, and they can't see it. So why is my slideshow not, I still have to share it, I understand that, but the entire screen's covered, I can't get to share.
I'm not, okay, so when you try to share,
Well, I
you,
can't get to the share button because my entire screen is covered with PowerPoint. So I have no buttons to work with other than escape.
okay. 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 Can you see me?
I can. Can you see me?
Okay. So on the, let's see if you gave me option.
I didn't when I got in because I didn't.
Okay, that's fine. That's perfect because that's better. On the,
Didn't get PowerPoint.
Oh, no, you need the other key.
Computer, hang on.
you should be in the Zoom first, but the PowerPoint could be in the background so that when you put share, it gives you the and you're froze. Yeah, how about if Alyssa comes down and helps you?
Well, we only have this for an hour because that's what
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna work much today. Definitely need some help. So why don't we?
It doesn't give you the option to share.
Well, it does right now. Should I share first and then?
Yes. Yes. When you share, you'll choose your PowerPoint to share. You put share screen and then it comes up with something that gives you the option of what you're sharing.
All right, now I'm understanding. And I'm trying to.
And I'm seeing your PowerPoint.
You are.
Yes, I am.
Okay. So that's the page I want. Can you see that?
And so I'm seeing it in your version. So click it to slideshow.
Okay. Can everybody see that?
I'm seeing yours.
I have everybody else muted. Do I want to unmute them or just ask them to wave if they can see it? All right.
Yeah, I can see it.
Hey, hang on. I'm trying to get into this. That one girl I don't know, Sherry. Hi.
Hi, I'm Jim Morta's daughter.
Oh, okay. Oh, I know you. Hey, where are we at? I'm lost. Is that Jim down here?
All right. I don't know if we're going to have a class.
I'm trying to get everything straightened out here. Because I got everything set up. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Good. How about you, Rick?
Yes, I can hear hear you.
is somewhere.
You're a little low.
Okay, can everybody see the screen with the PowerPoint?
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and he can hear you too. So you guys.
all right, we're gonna make an attempt to go through this together, and you guys can, would ask you, if you would, if you know how, to mute yourself unless you're asking a question. So please, find your mute button and mute yourself so we don't get interference going with things that are being said. And if you have a question, yeah, just unmute yourself and ask it. All right, so we're beginning back in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. We're going to start at verse 16. The whole idea of beginning back with this, of course, we want to keep in mind that Solomon had the frustration of this life in his heart and mind, in the fact that he, as the king, the wisest man on earth at that moment in time, didn't exactly know or couldn't have the power to fix things. And he wanted to fix things. Excuse me. So I've got in the introduction text today, accepting the world with all of its flaws. This was a very hard thing for a man like Solomon to do. Think about that for a minute. You're the most powerful king on earth. You're the wisest man on the face of the earth. You've tested everything. You've gone in and out and up and down, and you've went over everything, and you've lived everything. You're at the end of your life, and everything at the end of your life is just like it was at the beginning. You haven't fixed anything. You haven't fixed the world. And you think you should have been able to. Now, if that sounds far-fetched, it isn't. A lot of people in this world still think this way themselves. We sometimes think this way ourselves. We go into our friends and our family and others, and we say to them, you have a problem? Let me fix it. Of course, that maybe more men do that than women, but nevertheless, that's what us men want to do. We want to fix things. And so we come to the realization, especially at the end here with Solomon, that these things are just not fixable. What God has placed in this world as crooked, we cannot straighten. It will not be straightened. It's a world of good and evil. So it's unable to make straight what is crooked. We're unable to measure the existence of what is wanting or lacking. We can't add to this world. We can't fix this world. Even when the power and the riches of the all-powerful King Solomon, he was frustrated to influence this world in a way that would fix it. Solomon would be frustrated in his influence even of his own people. Remember what he calls himself, the preacher. The preacher is simply the crier, the one that calls out to the people to inform them, to teach them. And he calls the book Ecclesiastes, which is the assembly. So he, as the preacher, wants to be able to tell his assembly, God's people, what he's learned about this world of vanity. This just underlines his conclusion of not trusting in this world. And in not trusting in this world, he wants us to understand there's a better world, a world to come, a world of more. And he wants us to desire it, to search for it, to become part of it. Not living a life which places all of its value in this world, and the results of doing so will be devastating. It was devastating to Solomon to look back on his life and see so many of the things he had done in order to search out for the things of this world. The reality is, at the end of our lives, there will be an end to this vanity, a vanity which is emptiness, a vanity which will only lead to a final judgment by God. For those that seek not to look for more, that's all they will have. That's the emptiness that they will have at the final judgment. In its core, there is only the vanity of vanities for this life, which is here for a little while and then vanishes away, as James told us in James chapter 4. Why is this so hard on a man like Solomon? Well, I think we answered that as we started this, and that's because Solomon wanted to fix it. He wanted to be able to accomplish and influence in other people's lives what he had learned, what he had gleaned by all the things that he was able to do in his life. What is it? We have Olivia and David, it looks like. And want to thank you for coming aboard. I did mute you. If you want to ask a question, I think you can unmute yourself and do so. Okay. Why is this so hard for a man like Solomon? Why can't he just accept the fact of what he sees and what's happening in his life? And I think the answer is Solomon knew his responsibilities. Solomon knew who he was. He knew what he had from God in wisdom. And he felt the overwhelming responsibility to his people. Solomon attempts to answer the questions of his people and the questions he asks concerning this life, as he describes who he wanted to be in this world, and he wanted this world to be, but he couldn't fix it. He couldn't influence it like he thought he could. So he tells the assembly of God's people, as their king, as their preacher, what he's learned. And as he goes through these questions and statements in Ecclesiastes, he makes it clear the things that he wants them to learn and shows them his frustration and such. If we go on to the next slide, we're going to go through these verses. I don't know exactly how to fix this, but I have all your pictures in my way as I read this slide, so I'm going to actually put it up on my sheet at the same time, so I will read it from that since there are letters missing. But hopefully Cheryl and Alyssa and maybe Kelsey are going to come over here and teach me some things before we do this again, and we'll see how it goes. We're starting, if you want to look in your Bibles, at Ecclesiastes 1:16. The title I put at the top of the slide, despite the grievous effort of the wisest of the wise, the wisest man on earth at his time, Solomon, and the strongest of the strong, again King Solomon, who was the greatest king in his time, he could not influence or fix the world with its weaknesses, with its lacking, with the things that he wanted to do, which was sad to him. It was difficult for him to accept that. And in so telling the world that what he's doing and what he has seen and what he has learned, he's trying to tell all of us, through the Spirit of God, of course, that we too need to understand what this world lacks, what this world cannot give, and what this world will not give in the end. As we begin in the text, then, let me get a drink. Yeah? Solomon says, I said to myself. Now, I love that statement because I talk to myself all the time. It's probably not a healthy thing to do, I suppose, but sometimes it works. Sometimes when I say it out loud, I get a different meaning to it, a different thought to it, a different feeling about the statement. And so Solomon, whether he's saying this out loud or in his mind, I do not know. But exactly what he's saying to us is he's trying to accept something. Do you ever fight with your mind and your heart and go over something over and over again in order to accept it, to realize it, to understand it? I think we do. I think we do over and over. And it's in this life that Solomon was fighting with himself. I said to myself, as he talked to himself, as he pondered, as he meditated, as he focused. One of the things here I want to make sure we understand is the mind of Solomon. All of our minds are different. I don't want to offend anybody, but sometimes we're shallow and sometimes we're deep. If you want to get deep in a subject, you have to really think about it. You have to spend some time on it. You can't just go over the top of it or with a cursory way, just let it in your heart and mind for a minute and then move on. It doesn't work that way. It's not how we're built. It's not how we're made. Solomon understood that. And with such great wisdom from God, Solomon had an understanding that exactly what he was thinking about, he took to the depth of the depths. He took to a greater depth and focus than most of us will ever take it. And he did so not only in just his mind and heart, but in his experiences, in his life, in how he lived. Now, some of that was good. Some of it was not so good, because he did the same thing with the lusts of the flesh. He did the same thing with the desires of the body. And so he has, I believe, some regrets as he looks back. So he says to himself in a meditation-focused depth way, behold. This word behold I love in the Old Testament because it is really the word lo, L-O. And it's used many times for those that God is speaking of who are his servants. He used it with Abraham considerably. He used it with others throughout the Old Testament. What does it mean, behold or lo? It means exactly what Solomon was doing when he said, I said to myself. It means that you not only are looking at something, but you're totally focused on it. Your entire being is trying to meditate, ponder, and understand it. Behold, Solomon says, to see something, to take notice, to indeed know something. Jesus used two words in the New Testament that are similar to this when he talked about something he wanted people to take notice of and to know was important. He started sentences with truly, truly. The concept of truly, truly was the understanding. This is of an utmost fact and needs to be understood. It needs to be known, and it needs to be seen in a depth of mind and heart. To look closely at something, to examine it thoroughly so that you might know it and understand it. Solomon did this in his life with these things of this life. And in doing that, he had a depth that was greater than everybody else as the wisest man on the face of the earth. And he wants to explain that to his people. He wants, as the preacher, for them to be able to see and understand like he sees and understands. So he goes on and he says, I have magnified and increased wisdom. What do you do when you magnify something? Well, frankly, with my eyesight, I have to magnify things. That's why I wear the glasses I wear. If I didn't magnify things, they would be blurry and unseeable. So you magnify something to see it more clearly, to understand it more clearly. Remember, Solomon's not just talking about his eyes and back in his head. He's talking about his mind, his heart, his spirit, the depth of his understanding or his wisdom. So he magnified and increased. Magnified, seeing something as greatly as it could be seen, and increased by seeing it that way. He was able to increase understanding or wisdom about that subject. What's the subject that Solomon is all about in this book? I think it's twofold. One he mentions constantly, the other one he mentions rarely. The first, of course, life under the sun, the vanity of this life on this earth, which will end and won't end well, because there is a judgment coming if people only will follow after this world. And the other side of that coin that we've talked about so much is the life to come. And I think Solomon puts down, or at least magnifies and increases the wisdom of the vanity of this life in order for us to understand the life of more, to see the life of more. and to understand the importance of the life of man. So as he magnified and increased wisdom, this is what I have accomplished in this world, he says. This is the gift that God gave me, to look with great scrutiny at everything and to know everything. And then what do I do with it? Take it to my grave? No, I use it to help others. As the preacher who cried out to the assembly so that they might have an understanding, just like he had an understanding of these things. So as he magnified and increased wisdom, more than all who were in Jerusalem before me. That's a fascinating statement, and it's really to some degree comical to read about 7 different commentaries on that statement. Many of those commentaries don't believe Solomon wrote this book, so they come to it in a totally different manner. I think they're totally wrong there, and we've talked about that already. But what Solomon is saying is, more than all that were Jerusalem before me. The commentaries claim Solomon couldn't have wrote this because there were only 3 kings before him, and he couldn't be talking about just the 2, Saul and David. And my question, I guess, to them would be, why not? But I think he's actually talking about more than kings. All who were over Jerusalem before him. Many believe that he's talking about the judges. Many believe that he's talking about the men of God. I believe, in a type and shadow, he's going all the way back to Melchizedek. Now, Melchizedek was something that was in the type and shadow of Jesus Christ, and he was more than Solomon in that he was not only king, but he was priest. Solomon is not priest, he's just king. But Solomon is making a statement, a broad statement, that I think is covered, or at least explained by the scriptures, that he was the wisest man that ever lived. And I think that's the statement he makes. Now, in the context he's given us here, that he magnified and increased wisdom beyond all men that were over Jerusalem before him. And remember, being over Jerusalem simply meant he was king of God's people. And so all of those men that were over God's people before him, he is wiser than them. Why? Of course, we know why. Because that's what he prayed for. And that's what God gave him as a blessing. So yes, I think Solomon is making the statement that he's even wiser than his father David, wiser than the other men that came before him that were over God's people, because God has given him more wisdom under the sun than he had given others. God blessed him with a greater discernment than he had given others. And in so making that statement, he goes on to say, and my mind has observed. So magnified and increased wisdom and being wiser than all of those over God's people before him, what has happened to me? My mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. When he says observed, what does he mean? And what does he mean by my mind? Of course, the mind is the heart of the thinking, the understanding, the spirit or core of the man, of us. And it's what we think with. It's the Spirit of God that's in us, if you will. And so in that mind or heart, which has more wisdom than any other, he has set out to test the things of this life. He has set out to observe the things of this life and how he can interact with them. And in so doing, he has a wealth. A wealth of money, yes, but that's not what he's talking about. It's a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. Now, I want to ask ourselves a question. And I'm not going to put myself in this category because I'm certainly not of the wealth of wisdom and knowledge that Solomon was, not even close. But I want to ask ourselves a question. If you have a wealth of wisdom and knowledge in a subject, in a particular subject, and you know the subject extremely well, what is it like having a conversation with somebody who thinks they know something and don't know, really? What is it like to have a conversation with somebody who's totally wrong about a subject but won't listen to a word you say? What is it like to have a wealth of wisdom and knowledge and be trying to teach someone, but they won't listen to you? Well, what it is like is frustrating. This is one of the frustrations I think Solomon has in this book, is he has this wealth of knowledge because he's done all of this observing and testing, and he's been given wisdom greater than any other man over God's people before by God, and he wants the people to hear it. He wants them to behold, as he started out this slide. Behold. Behold means more than just hearing the words, taking them in, and then going on to the next subject. Behold means taking the words in, thinking about them, pondering them, meditating on them, and then acting on them to make changes because of them. Solomon wants this wealth of wisdom and knowledge that he has now to sink into his people, to affect his people, to change his people, to do what he wants this to do. And in a great way, of course, so does God. God, through the Holy Spirit, has inspired Solomon to write this book. Some people reject this book because they think it's down on God. They think it's down on life under the sun, which God gave us to live. I couldn't disagree more. I think it's the most positive book that I've ever studied, in the sense that the positivity is supposed to point us in a different direction than the negativity of life under the sun. If we put all of our faith, all of our love, all of our effort in life under the sun, Solomon wants us to know the end result. And in so knowing the end result, we won't do or make this fatal mistake. That's a positive message. That's not a negative message. So in my mind, to observe all of this, there's a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. Are you listening to me? Solomon is asking. Are you willing to listen to me? Solomon is asking. And in frustration, not only of this life that he couldn't influence and change it, but in the people that he couldn't influence and change. He goes on, of course, and says, I set my mind to, yes, go ahead, Kinsel. I have to do something, I'm sure. So I think Kinsel has, and this is why we're doing this.
Yeah. Why don't we turn that around? If you're not smart, how would it be to talk to a smart person?
Well, yeah, of course. That's in of itself.
Don't interfere when you start.
I've got other people talking there. So, Kinsel, can you remute yourself? And I'll try to deal with the question.
What I said was that if you're not a smart person, how would you talk to a smarter person? Like
Yes.
Solomon.
Yes.
He was smart. He couldn't talk to an ordinary person. But for people like me, who's not educated, how would I talk to an educated person?
Well, yes, it's a question going both ways, I assume. The first thing that needs to happen, of course, is what? Well, my slideshow has decided to go crazy. So again, bear with me until I get back to where we were. All right. I love technology. No, why are you doing that?
Don't. He's talking.
I don't know why it's doing it on its own, but I will keep my hand off of it and hopefully it'll stop. Kinsel, back to your question. It is hard to talk to someone who is well educated and maybe knows something more about a subject than you do, but here's the key to all of that I've learned in the past myself, and that is shut up and listen. I hope that wasn't too blunt, but that's what I had to learn to do. When you're talking to somebody who has knowledge in a subject, it's better to keep quiet and listen to them, especially all the way through. What I used to want to do is interrupt every 5 minutes or every 5 seconds and say, what did you mean by that? Or how does that work? Or how does this work? The problem is they answered most of those questions before they were done. But again, my computer's decided that it likes to work on its own. I have no idea why. Somebody's controlling this besides me. Why? Okay. So, when you're speaking to someone who is highly educated, you need to first communicate with them that you are not necessarily on their same level. Your hope that as they speak back to you, they will take that to heart, and pride won't cause them to speak to you in a way that you can't understand them. Now, a lot of people who are highly educated are so prideful, they can't do that. They can't try to speak to you on your level. They will try to speak to you on their level and then are disgusted with you when you don't understand. That's sad, really. Not on your part, on their part. So when you're having a conversation with somebody who is to some degree greater educated, maybe uses words that you don't understand, perhaps is talking about something they haven't laid the foundation for properly, or given a better understanding so that you can understand what they're trying to tell you, you need to ask questions, but you need to listen to them first. Because as you interrupt, sometimes you don't know the right questions to ask yet. And sometimes the questions you're going to ask are answered as they continue on. But on the other side of that story, as we our question that you just asked, they have to be mindful of you. A lot of speakers aren't. I get caught up in this, I have to admit. Yes, Cheryl, go ahead. Can you unmute yourself, or do I have to do it? Go ahead.
I can unmute myself. As Christians, we need to be, and that's part of the wisdom. It's God. We need to be always seeking God, and we may have all the knowledge. And my kids, who are astray, I know what needs to be said. I know where to direct them. I know all of this, but I have to pray every single day, all day long, for God's wisdom in timing, in just exactly the right words at the right time.
Yep.
So we need to keep it centered in God. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it has to do, I'm a teacher, and so it does have, secular knowledge and book knowledge. I still need to be focused on God so that I know what to say, how to say it, when to say it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So in both of those, in the question and those answers you're talking about, it's not easy to listen to somebody who's as wise as Solomon sometimes. In my cursory reading of this book in the past, I would say every third verse I was totally lost. It's not an easy book to read. It's not an easy book to understand. It's not an easy book to understand the wisdom of Solomon. Until you get a core foundation for what Solomon's trying to reveal and use that core foundation in most of his statements, you really don't understand what he's trying to tell us. So when people are talking to you, it's hard sometimes to understand what they're trying to tell you. Not just in the words they use, if they communicate on a higher level than your education, but in an understanding they have that they don't know you don't have. I'm going to use a quote from a dear friend who we lost just a few months ago, Larry Gilbert. Jokingly, he used to tell me all the time, it is an accident if we communicate with one another. Now, what did Larry mean by that? Of course, remember, it was a joke in the sense that Larry was trying to point out the difficulty of communication. And for some reason, I've decided to go crazy on my PowerPoint again, and I've got to go back to where I was. What he was trying to make in that statement, or get understanding of in that statement, was simply the difficulty of communication. Both sides have to understand that. If both sides don't understand that communication difficulty, communication will never happen. All right, I have no idea why this thing is playing me slideshow. Somewhere in here, it's decided to jump to slideshow. And so this is the nightmare I had last night while I was in bed. All of this would go wrong and we wouldn't get anything done. All right, so to answer your question, Kinsel, is that better answer your question? Okay, good. So if we go on then with this wealth of knowledge and experience that Solomon had, he wants his people to understand he set his mind to know this wisdom. Now, what does that mean to them? What does that mean to us? Well, again, I'm repeating myself, but with the understanding of the amount of riches Solomon had, the amount of power that Solomon had, and the amount of wisdom that God gave him to be able to look inside things, to meditate on things, to ponder things all the way through, we should put a confidence in what he has to say. That's what he wants his people to do. I've listened to people who have spoken, and within 5 minutes, it became obvious to me they didn't know what they're talking about, and what do I do at that point? Well, same thing you do. I just tune them out. I start thinking about other things because they're not making any sense to me. They're not saying things that make sense. Solomon was not one of those people, and he wants his people to listen. He wants them to ponder. He wants them to understand the wisdom of magnified and increased that he has to give them understanding. So I set my mind to know wisdom with great effort. Solomon was not shallow, but he had great depth and a conscious decision to know something, requiring much time and fortitude. How much time have you thought through how to build a jet engine? I've never thought through how to build a jet engine. I don't think I could build a jet engine. I don't want to build a jet engine. And if I started thinking it through, I probably wouldn't get very far. All right, so if I wanted to build a jet engine or have one built, who would I go to? Someone who has thought it through, someone who knows how, someone who has learned it. All right, Solomon has learned these things about life under the sun, and he set his mind to know the wisdom of life under the sun, and he wants them to understand that, and he has a lot to say about it. And so this is the core of this book to this degree. He says, and are also to know madness and folly. So to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, are they opposite sides of the coin? Well, yes and no. There is a wisdom that you had to have to know madness and folly, but a wisdom is greater than madness and folly because it chooses wiser. Madness and folly, many people in this world are all about. I remember working with many people at a younger age, and the whole week long, Monday through Friday, they had one thing in mind, what they were going to do on the weekend. And what were they planning to do on the weekend? Madness and folly. They were all about drinking and other things that we won't discuss right now. What was the weekend about? It was about them exploring madness and folly. Now, did Solomon explore madness and folly? Oh, yeah, he did. To its depth. 300 wives, 700 concubines. Read the book of Song of Solomon. The madness and folly of this world in many different ways, some of them sins. As Nehemiah said, Solomon sinned when it came to women. Madness and folly he experienced. He had the depth of understanding, but he also had the depth of understanding of wisdom. And in the two opposite sides of that coin, He wants them to listen to him. He wants them to see the importance of what he has to say about this topic. The fleshful sensuality of this world and madness and folly, the base ways of this life, Solomon has come to some conclusions on. He says, I realized. When you realize something, you draw a conclusion. You come to the core of what it is. How? By a depth of thinking of it. I realized that this also is striving after wind. What is? This concept not only of just wisdom and thinking it all the way through and then not with the frustration being able to fix it, but this madness and folly of living a life for nothing more than fulfilling the sensuality of the flesh, which a tremendous amount of this world does. That's all they're concerned about. How I can satisfy the eyes and the ears. The eyes, which are never satisfied, and the ears, which are never full, Solomon says. You satisfy the lusts of the flesh today, guess what? It's back tomorrow. It's back in a few hours, usually. It's what that life is about. It's madness and folly. I realize that this is also striving after wind. It's empty. It has no substance to it. Wisdom tells me if this is all you're going for, you're going to have a life of emptiness, a life of constant repetition, or repetitiveness, word I'm after, but not a life of satisfaction, of fulfillment. In the end, what will you have? Most likely you will have a body that is ravaged by the lust of the flesh. And you will not have stored up treasures in heaven. Treasures in heaven that God says, Jesus said, is our only hope. So as we finish this portion, because in much wisdom or responsibility there is much grief. Now, the wisdom that is on the flip side of the madness and folly is the understanding Solomon wants us to have. And it is in that wisdom or understanding comes responsibility. And there's much grief in that responsibility. There's much grief in just the wisdom of the understanding of the responsibility. What do we feel when we sin? What comes on us, those of us who are striving for the more, those of us who want more than just this life, those of us who are frustrated by this life only? What do we want? What do we feel when we sin? Do we feel grief? Do we feel shame? Do we feel guilt? Are we dissatisfied with ourselves? Do we ask ourselves, why again have I done this? Why have I fallen back into this? Why have I committed this sin again and again and again? It happens to us. It happens to everybody. It happens to the world, of course, that's only about madness and folly. Now, some people have seared themselves over. It's like that scab that you've worked on so many times that it has a callus over it. Now you don't feel it anymore. There's no feeling whatsoever. A lot of people live their lives that way. They are a madness and folly about their lives that is so seared over, they feel no guilt, no shame. They feel nothing. Solomon is warning against that. He's warning that the wisdom that shows us responsibility should have some grief, and did have some grief to him. But the grief was not only in things of sin and the sensuality of mass and folly, it is in the wisdom itself. The more wisdom you have, the more knowledge and understanding you have, the more responsibility you feel. The more responsibility you feel that you cannot fulfill, the more grief, the more frustration you're going to feel. This is a frustration of the mind in the realization of the paradoxes of this life, which God has given us to live under the sun. Living under the sun in these kind of difficulties is not easy, because life is not easy. When we go out into life and we try to do the right things, sometimes it's harder than it is easy. If life was perfect, if we lived in paradise and we did all the right things, things would be good. But they're not that way all the time, are they? There are sayings that we have in this life about doing good never goes unpunished. I mean, things of that nature we say because the frustration of this life sometimes is like that. A good deed never goes unpunished. In other words, it isn't always rewarded. In fact, try saying something righteous on Facebook in the public and see what kind of responses you get. Now, because of the friends we have on Facebook, we will get mostly positive responses. But if you put it on Twitter, look out, because it's coming back at you probably in the negative, because most people are living where? To know madness and folly. That's where they're living in their lives. So this idea that the wisdom not only was grief in the sense of the sin and the shame and the guilt, but also in the sense that there is a responsibility to these things. And the increasing of knowledge of those things under the sun, not only in just satisfying the lust, but the knowledge of God himself and the ways of God and the world of God, results in increasing pain, Solomon said. Again, grief and pain is what Solomon says sometimes comes with understanding and wisdom and knowledge. We sometimes say ignorance is bliss. Well, technically it's not, but again, the saying is there, so we might have a better understanding of what Solomon just said. With greater wisdom, there is greater responsibility. With greater wisdom, there is an increase of knowledge. And with greater wisdom, there's an increase of grief and pain in what we know. In Solomon's case, I think it was more about being king and being the wisest man on earth. He looked out over the world as king, his world, his people, and he really wanted to fix the things that were wrong. He really wanted to right the wrongs. He really wanted to cause justice over injustice. Did he? Could he? Well, he couldn't. Men will be men, women will be women. They will partake of madness and folly, just like Solomon participated in. In this understanding of the world, God has given man in which the things that are crooked cannot be straightened, and the things which do not measure up cannot be changed. That was a big frustration to Solomon. He really wanted to be able to fix things, to change things. These things leave a world that is wanting, with grave shortcomings that won't be fixed, that can't be fixed, that we have to live with, that we have to live in. One of the hardest things to live in shortcomings of this world is when they hit home, when you're in your own family, not only physically but spiritually. I know with my grandson, I ask myself every day, why? It doesn't matter why. This is the world we live in. This is who or the body that he was given. And for him, it's lesser than most. But in his heart and mind, he sees the more than most. He sees life different than we do. He has a concentration, a meditation, a pondering to some degree that's greater than I ever did at his age. Solomon shows a lesser world in comparison to the world of more, the world to come, in this book. And he's trying to say in this book that if we're only going to latch ourselves to this madness and folly, to this world of madness and folly, even with all of our wisdom, there's a lot of grief and pain. And we won't have an end result that we will like. The kingdom of heaven, the spiritual world of God, this is what we're after. This is who we are. Now, I only put this thing on for an hour, so I'm assuming it's going to end in an hour. Is that right, Cheryl? All right, so we only have a couple more minutes. There were about 3 other slides I wanted to get to, but we're not going to. I'll work on them down the road Solomon repeats himself many times in this book. And he repeats himself with a similar theme, but with more depth as he goes through the book. And so we will revisit some of these things. And as we revisit them, we will look at some of the other scriptures. Now, to end this thing, I want to tell you that my part has been a disaster when it comes to technology. But we will work on it. I've set it up so it saves. I do not know how to take it from this a particular venue to the next. And I do not know how to put it in YouTube or all the things that I need to do. So Cheryl says she will help, Alyssa, Cheryl will help me do that. So I hope to get it up and running somewhere else as a recording so others can watch it. And I hope to be better at it on Wednesday night at 6. So again, I thank all of you for being here. And I thank all of those that will watch it later as a recording. And we will get better at this. I will get better at this. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye-bye. See ya.
Yep.